AJ and I are working on in regards to selling a business. And I believe you've been through the experience and just wanted to interview you around that.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Um, and I've been through, I have personally not sold my business, but I have helped women sell their businesses.
Uh, Perfect. Perfect. That's even better. So
Okay.
before we get started, Patty, um, I am recording, but may I have your permission to record? Is this okay?
Yes,
Okay.
you
The
have my
second thing,
permission. Yeah.
thank you. The second question I have about the recording is our readers love to see the behind the scenes. So sometimes we will broadcast a interview after the book is published. So do I have your permission to also share this with our readers?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. And if you change your mind at the end, just tell me, we can delete the recording, but I would love to use this.
Well, I'm happy to help you promote the book.
Oh, you
So,
rock.
yeah, so I'd be happy to do that. And we can talk more about ways that perhaps I can help.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how this came about, just to give you a little context, and I just want to hear your stories and experience, is AJ and I were doing one of our writing retreats, and she asked me the question that she regularly asks: she goes, "What do your readers need now?" And so many readers, when I do speaking engagements or something like that, when I survey them informally, by show of hands, who here intends to sell their business one day? It's their retirement money. Every hand goes up. But the reality is something like 1 to 3% of businesses ever sell. And ask who's prepared, and of course, no hand goes up. So what I'm trying to do is to create a book that shows readers who are not prepared to sell business that they can still do it with maybe a small amount of moves or adjustments. But uh, I've also discovered that some people that want to sell their business, it's imminent. They've hit the wall. They're tired. They want just to exit now, and to give them opportunity to do that. So based upon that, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background and your experience and how you've helped women sell businesses?
You bet. So I started my company in 2006.
Okay.
Prior to that, I had a company that focused on political consulting and lobbying. I loved it. It was fascinating, and I'd never do it
Hmm.
again.
Okay.
However, and boy, am I glad I'm not in that world now.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I found myself in a position where I was 35 years old, had three
Yeah.
little kids at home, a thriving business, and a surprise divorce.
Mm,
And I ended up having to close my business
mm,
because I needed to stop traveling and I needed health insurance. And you couldn't just go out and buy health insurance then.
mm,
So I was in the situation where I didn't have the luxury of time and wouldn't have even known where to begin to try to sell my business.
mm,
So that really has been a big motivator for me. So I did go out and get a job. Excuse me. I went to work at an international school as director of development and then director of operations.
mm,
And when I started this company in 2006, the Block Group, I focused on several things. One was helping women grow their businesses by pricing for value, developing this sales process that works well for women, and helping them streamline their operations. It's very much on the operational side.
mm.
As I worked with more and more women business owners, I started to hear the same things I think you're hearing about, first of all, they're not thinking about exit. They're not thinking about it and they're not talking about it.
Right.
And which also means they're not going to make it happen,
Mm,
right? Even under duress, if God forbid they had a health issue or whatever the circumstance is, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to find the right resources to help them position for sale. So that's why those percentages are so incredibly low. And because I experienced that, I thought, it is a crime that we spend our lives building our companies and then we close the doors and
mm,
we don't realize the value that we've built. And especially for women, because I'm so passionate about that, I believe wealth in the hands of women elevates society as a whole.
mhm,
And that's part of my mission. And you mentioned that a lot of business owners think of their business as their retirement plan. Well, the difference with women, and again, I don't know if this gender distinction would be in your book, but for women, they may think that it's their retirement plan, but they really have no interest or desire to retire.
Mm,
They want to go do something else.
mm-hmm.
So I've talked to women business owners who have been done, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
They're just done. They've hit that wall. They're ready for a change. Often they want to do something more creative, more fun. So, especially because I work with technical experts
Mm-hmm.
and they want to do something creative. So, because of that, they're not interested in retiring. Having that wealth from selling their company allows them to do the next thing. And that's really what it excites them.
Mm,
So, my experience in helping women, I'm I'm not a business broker. I don't help them with the transaction piece of it. I help them prepare so that they've built real business value, and people misunderstand what that means, right? Because a lot of
mm-hmm.
people think if they just keep generating revenue, that they've built the value of their company, and it's really not the case.
Mm,
So I'm helping them build real business value and position their company for sale.
mm.
And positioning it is a critical piece of it. Again, people don't really get that because everything is contingent on your buyer.
So let's take a pause or dig into there right
Yeah.
now. The positioning a company for sale. I'd love to hear how you do that. What were the common things that aren't positioned well? How do you do that? And are these things that can be done quickly? What's the time frame? That type of stuff.
Well, the conundrum for most business owners is that they don't want anyone to know that they're thinking of exiting. They don't want their staff to know for sure.
Yeah.
And they also don't want to let their clients know because they don't want to shake the client's confidence
Mm,
and have them start shopping for a different resource.
yeah.
So the secretive nature of positioning is really a challenge. And for years, I haven't talked about this particular work that I do. I talk about it one on one, but I have not included it in my messaging for exactly that reason. Because once someone reaches out to me, they feel like secrecy is gone. And
Okay.
it's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
But okay, so you asked the question of how do you go about positioning?
Yeah.
So the first thing you need, obviously, is a roadmap.
Okay.
And when I'm working with someone, it's based on what's important to the business owner. Some
Okay.
people care a lot about getting the highest dollar amount
Mm-hmm.
possible.
Mm-hmm.
Some people care about that a little bit less, but they care a lot about legacy.
Mm,
So it starts with what is most important to the business owner, and then who do they think they want to sell to? And I say it in that way because it's kind of, um, I know you wouldn't use this term, but it's a crapshoot,
yeah.
right? You don't know who is going to find value in your company until you get further along in the process.
Mm.
But I will tell you one huge mistake people make, and that is getting a business valuation when
Oh,
they're, yeah,
okay. I'm sorry. Keep going. That's just interesting. I didn't expect you to say that.
yeah, it's a huge mistake because a business valuation can be and is often super valuable later, but not in the beginning because it is inaccurate within a month of having it done.
Mm,
Your business is constantly evolving. And
mm,
so people misunderstand or are told that they, especially CPAs do this a lot. They say, oh, the first thing you need to do is get a business valuation. But you haven't intentionally built the value.
mm.
So that means that all your math is going to be based on a super low number.
Right. Because it's the current state. It's not the basically, if I have an automobile and I say, what's this car worth to a buyer? And then the next day I polish the car, I clean the car, the perceived value may increase,
Exactly.
something like that. Okay. Okay. Got it.
Well, and that's the whole concept of positioning,
Yeah.
right? You want to position it for a higher value.
Yeah. Okay.
And everything is contingent on who the buyer is. So another common issue, it's not a mistake, but it's an issue, is doing SOPs.
Okay.
Okay. Every business needs SOPs. They need standard operating procedures. They need business processes documented. That's almost a given. But business owners are often told that's the second thing you need to do after you get your business valuation.
Yeah.
The second thing you need to do is make sure you have all your SOPs. So the business owners get really busy with that. But especially for accounting and bookkeeping practices,
Yeah.
often the buyer just wants your client list
Mm.
and they want you to help with the transition. They don't need your business processes because you're in a regulated industry,
Mm.
right? And
Mm.
so many business processes for an accounting or bookkeeping firm are exactly the same from firm to firm.
Mm.
So I think business owners are getting poor advice, especially from their accountants. No offense to accountants,
Yeah.
but the accountants are doing it because it makes their job easier when they have
Mm.
numbers to work with. But it
Mm.
doesn't help the business owner at all. And in fact, it works against the business owner because business valuations cost between $10,000 and $25,000.
Mm.
So those are some of the pitfalls that I see.
Okay.
And then once the business owner has followed that advice, and it's taken a lot of time, they've gotten the business valuation, they've paid their 20,000, they've worked on SOPs if they didn't have them already, and they're starting to think in that way. All of a sudden they look up and they think, well, now what?
Mm-hmm.
And it's because everything is backwards.
Mm. So what
So
is the first thing they should do?
the first thing they need to do is address their limiting beliefs.
Okay.
And it's not easy and it's not fun. And they have to be really brave to do that. I give
Okay.
people a lot of credit for that. They have to recognize. So, again, I'm speaking from the filter of working with women.
Sure.
Women often think, I have nothing to sell. No one's going to be interested in buying my company, so I'm not even going to bother.
Mm.
And I don't know if the guys feel that way, but I know women do.
Mm-hmm.
And they also think, I am so busy because my target are companies that are between 1 and 10 million in annual revenue. And the challenge is they're so busy. They've built a complex organism. They're bringing in lots of revenue. They usually have a pretty complex team. And they think, how on earth am I going to focus on positioning my company? And I have to keep it secret and do everything I'm already doing.
Mm-hmm.
So they feel very overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And so then that leads to how we start working through what they believe, why they believe that, and how we can shift the paradigm. So I talk a lot about exit instead of selling your company.
Okay.
Because
What's the difference?
exit means different things to different people. Selling your company is a transaction, but
Mm.
exit can mean, it might mean that you transition your company to, and that's a distinction I want to make. Selling your company is a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
If you are exiting, it's a transition
Gotcha.
and it happens over time and you can change your mind. You can decide you're going to sell your company to your employees and you're going to do that over time, which is often a great strategy.
Mm.
And there's a structure to do it because you can do an ESOP. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a structure to do it. You can hire someone to help you and it's kind of a win-win for everybody. So it's a really good strategy. It takes time, takes money,
Mm-hmm.
have to find the right resource.
Mm-hmm.
But when you are doing that, you can change your mind. You can go in a different direction. Whereas if you've already entered into a transaction, it is really hard to change your mind and it can screw around a lot of people. So that's part of the difference is we need to decide what you want from your exit
Mm.
before we start positioning for your
Mm.
exit.
Okay. So when people say, uh, I don't have anything at all, why should I bother? How do you change that perception?
So in my experience, that is almost never the case.
Okay.
Okay. So if they trust me and we have had these conversations, I can start to identify. So I'll go in and do an analysis and I will start to identify their business assets.
Okay.
And assets, especially for expertise-based businesses, it
Okay.
starts with intellectual property.
Okay. So give me some examples of what intellectual property could be.
If they've written a book,
Okay.
anything that is copywritten. So
Okay.
really anything that they have posted, email newsletters,
Yeah.
anything that is original and creative can be copywritten. And those materials are proprietary to your company.
Yeah.
No one else can claim them. And you can choose to sell them. You can
Okay.
choose to sell your company that includes those assets, or you can sell your company and exclude those assets. But again, you have some choices.
Okay. So you can include or exclude assets. What are other things that have value? You said IP. What else?
If you have a strong management team,
Okay.
that is, I mentioned earlier, sometimes a buyer will only want to buy your client list,
Yeah.
but they still need you in
Yeah.
order for those clients to transition to the new owner,
Okay.
right? Because if you tell me, if my accountant sells her company and you tell me that now a new company is going to take over, I'm going to be nervous as a client,
Yeah.
right? Am I going to
Hmm.
get the same customer? But I trusted my accountant. I don't want to lose her, but I
Yeah.
understand she wants to take time off.
Yeah.
But it shakes my confidence.
Sure.
So so the new company needs her to calm me down
Hmm.
and to assure me, right? And so when I'm working with women that are transitioning their company, they've done the transaction, they're transitioning, I help them with the due diligence period and the transition period. And part of that is because the buyer is counting on them to help with the transition. So having a strong management team is a wonderful asset. Again, you have to finesse it in some ways because you need those people to stay
Mm.
in order for there to be a smooth transition.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, finessing it because we don't necessarily want to tip off the management team that we're selling
Correct?
necessarily prematurely, but also when we do, we want, I guess, to give them the confidence to stay for that transition plus, right? Okay.
Yes, and the way I approach that
Yeah. How do you?
is, yeah, the way I approach that is we start early. So when I talked about the roadmap, we start with what do they want to do with their business assets? And we list them out. And so, for example, the management team, every woman I've ever worked with feels super strongly. I want my management team, I want all my employees to keep their jobs.
Okay.
And I want to see if you can give them better benefits. Because as a small company, I'm kind of limited. But you're a
Mm.
big company that's gobbling up my company.
Hmm.
And I want to see if we can provide better benefits, perhaps do pay increases. What can you do? Or maybe offer bonuses. That's a really great strategy because the buyer is usually very willing to do that.
Right,
And
because there's retention, right? I'll give you a bonus on the day you stay, and then 6 months from now, if you're still here, type thing.
yes, or because you don't want people quiet quitting and looking
Yeah.
for other jobs. So
Right.
what they usually do is base it on performance.
Gotcha. Makes total sense.
And that's what I recommend. And so, and we don't do a bonus at the beginning with the sale. They
Okay.
get to keep their job, which is a benefit, right?
Hmm.
But then we give them all these wonderful benefits, like more paid time off, sometimes unlimited time off, which has
Mm.
gotten real popular. Uh, um, so we load them up with benefits.
Hmm.
And because these business owners have worked with their staff for usually a pretty long time, 10, 15 years, they know them well and they know what they care about. So they ask for that as part of the transaction. And that's the importance of that roadmap, is figuring out what's important to you as the owner and the seller
Mm-hmm.
and what you want to have happen. And I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes they care a lot more about money. Sometimes they care a lot more about what they want for their staff. Sometimes they care a lot more about um, they don't want to be involved in the transition past 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Most companies that buy want the owner to stay at least a year and sometimes longer than that.
Mm.
And I always recommend that the seller
Mm-hmm.
negotiate 6 months with an option to stay longer.
Okay.
And sometimes
Why,
the
why,
bigger
why is that?
companies,
What's the benefit? Why?
well, because this is a giant exercise in letting go.
I love that line.
And this goes back to mindset.
Okay.
And so here you are a woman business owner. You spent 20 years building your company. You've done things your way. You've been your own boss. Now somebody is coming and buying your company and they're going to do things differently, completely differently. And you're
Yeah.
not going to like it.
Yeah.
And it's going to be frustrating for you. And your staff is still going to come to you and expect you to fix things. But
Mm.
now you've given up your power.
Mm.
You don't have the
Mm-hmm.
power to fix things.
Mm-hmm.
And before you were spending your own money. Now you're spending somebody else's money.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a huge challenge for women that are high achieving, used to being their own boss, really enjoyed having the power to make those decisions. And now they've sold that power.
Mm. Mm. Well,
So when they stay longer, it becomes much more painful.
yeah, that makes sense. So I want to go back to the assets because this in particular is something I'm super curious about. So we talked about you can block out or identify the IP, your strong management team. Was there other elements that represent increasing the value of a business?
Yes.
Okay. What else?
Um, Consistent, predictable revenue.
Oh, okay. Tell me about that.
So remember that the person who does your valuation eventually,
Yeah.
or if you choose not to do a valuation, sometimes the buyer doesn't require it,
Okay.
right? But regardless, you're going to have accountants involved in the transaction and usually tax attorneys, and you definitely want to factor in the tax consequences of selling your company, and there always are.
Mm.
Because you have accountants involved and they see and breathe the numbers, that's really all they're going to look at. And they're going to start with consistent, predictable revenue because they need a multiple in order to tell you what they think a buyer will pay or what they
I hear
think
the word
the
multiple
valuation.
often. You said they need
Mhm.
a multiple. What exactly does that mean? Can you define that?
That, yeah. So what they do is they take your EBITDA,
Yeah.
which is essentially your cash flow,
Yep.
and they will assign a number to it that is a multiple of your cash flow.
Gotcha.
So they'll say, and you'll hear people say this, they'll say, I think you can sell for 3 times EBITDA.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, to the business owner, that is completely meaningless,
Mm-hmm.
right? And part of my role, I'm not an accountant. So part of my role is helping them interpret what the accountant or the valuation person is telling them
Okay.
and helping them think of it from a practical standpoint, from a management standpoint. What is it that you want to do to build value in your company so that others perceive it
Mm-hmm.
and to position your company so you get what you want? Because I'm the advocate for the business owner,
Oh, yeah, of course.
right?
Question about the EBITDA. So what I heard is the buyer will put a multiple on EBITDA typically
Mhm.
um, to determine a buy price. Is that because they're trying to project if I pay you X dollars based upon the historical cash flow, I will make that money back plus some in a certain time frame? Is that the rough calculation?
It's a rough calculation. I don't think the buyer really thinks that way.
Okay. Okay.
I think the accountants think that way.
What do you think the buyer, how does the buyer think, in your
I
opinion?
think so. Typically, what I've seen most, especially in expertise-based businesses,
Hmm.
they're the buyer has a growth strategy. They have their roadmap, and
Mm,
their roadmap includes acquiring multiple companies.
okay.
So they're not just buying my client's company. They're typically buying 3 or 4 at a time, and they're gobbling up smaller practices.
I see.
And I have worked with clients in the elder care industry, which is very hot right now because, of course, all the boomers are aging.
Sure.
And so I've worked with multiple companies in that industry, and in 2022 helped a client I had worked with for 6 years. I helped her sell her company. And that was exactly the circumstance. There was a larger company. It's actually a very big national company, was gobbling up. And I think they bought 8 elder care practices within a year.
Mm,
And that was part of their growth strategy, was through acquisition. So in that case, what they're thinking is this particular company has a model that works
yeah.
and they are profitable. They're consistently profitable. And that's good enough for me.
Totally got it now. Okay, I got it. So let's continue on back to the different sellable elements. I want to exhaust this list until you don't have much more on this list. So it's intellectual property, strong management team, consistent, predictable revenue. Are there other variables that you typically run into?
Yes,
Okay,
almost always they include the owner of the company in the transition.
the owner
So,
themselves.
so
Okay,
again, they want an assurance that you're going to stick around.
okay,
And that's why I often suggest that they negotiate to a 6 months with an option to stay.
okay.
Instead of what the buyer will request is, I want you to stay for 2 years. And
Right.
it's a nightmare for the owner.
It can be a nightmare. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's another
There's another
asset.
one.
Yeah,
Now you mentioned the customer list. Maybe that's part of IP or something like that. Is there other, or maybe there's physical assets? Are those also variables you consider?
definitely. So
Okay.
physical assets for sure, although the buyer won't care about computer equipment.
Yeah, that's sadly
Right.
discardable now. I
Right.
see. Okay.
So, but they will care if you have vehicles, if you have, if you own your office space. Like it's very common for business owners to buy a house
Yeah.
and operate out of the house.
Yeah.
Now, a smart business owner will buy the house personally and rent it to the business,
Mm,
but some business owners don't do that.
hmm.
And so they buy vehicles and houses or offices, and that's part of their balance sheet.
Hmm.
So those are assets, and they can choose to sell them if the buyer wants them.
Okay. So
Um,
physical assets. What
uh,
about, I've heard like someone has a secret recipe or some
yeah,
patent or something like that. What about those things?
yeah, intellectual property.
You know, like okay, that's part of IP. That's part of IP.
It's
Okay.
part of IP.
Yep.
Um, and actually, I didn't finish my statement. I talked
Oh, I'm
about
sorry.
copy. No, no, that was a while back. I just lost my train of thought.
Okay.
Um, the copyright is part of intellectual property. So are trademarks
Okay.
and registered trademarks or service marks. So, for instance, I have a concept called the broken cookie effect,
Okay.
and I have the registered trademark for that.
Okay.
So, basically, what that buys me is if somebody else uses it, I can send a cease and desist letter,
Gotcha.
or
Gotcha.
I can potentially sue them,
Right.
if I chose to. So, all of those are business assets,
Mm-hmm.
but your buyer may not care about those,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, everything is contingent on the buyer. And your client list is definitely an asset, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the path to the consistent, predictable revenue.
Yeah.
If you have a particular sales process,
Okay.
anything that's proprietary to your company, if you use a framework or a anything that makes you different
Mm.
or that you talk about publicly to distinguish your firm, that's part of your intellectual property.
Gotcha. So this is the scenario we're going into, and I'm wondering what your solution is, or if you have a story where you've been here. A business who says, "I'm done. I like to sell. I don't want to wait a year or two to prepare my business. I want to do it now." Um, you know, wise or not, are there ways to assist a business who is in this immediate sale mode and to maximize their value based upon what they've have? And if so, how do you do that? Do you have any stories of like that scenario?
So I have a different approach
Okay.
than you might expect.
Okay.
Mine, so what happens, and has happened to me multiple times, which is actually a good thing, is that I have started working with someone who wants to position their company for sale. I
Yeah.
tell them from the very beginning, it usually takes about 5 years
Yeah.
to do
Okay.
all this work and position your company and find your buyer.
Hmm.
More than more than I thought would happen, the women fall back in love with their business
Mm,
and they're not anxious to sell. So the people who have hit a wall and say, I'm done,
yeah.
as we start working together and we start taking the burden off their shoulders, essentially what they've done, especially if they've come out of a corporate career, they've created golden handcuffs for themselves in their business.
Yeah.
And they believe that their job is to solve every problem. And that's why they hit what I call a roadblock. They hit a roadblock because they get exhausted and overwhelmed. They get tired of trying to find the right people to help them.
Mm.
And when I'm streamlining operations, I'm reversing a lot of that. So instead of saying, yes, I can get your company ready in a year, I don't say that.
It's kind of ironic that these people who want to sell really, when they prepare the business for sale, that it becomes more desirable to them, right? So the
Yes.
better they position a business for sale, the less likely you are to want to sell it. It sounds like.
Yes. Well, because you understand that you can get more money
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be the terrible burden that you're feeling right now,
Yeah.
right? So it's a mindset shift, it's a paradigm shift. But also, um, there are many circumstances where they have so a lot of people that I work with, they're in their 50s and 60s and they're worried they're going to get sick. God
Yeah.
forbid they're going to get a cancer diagnosis
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
right. And so one of the things that you're doing when you're preparing your company for exit,
Yes.
it is a good, solid business strategy because in a way you're future proofing your business.
Oh, so even if you're not really interested in selling, the fact that you're preparing it for sale is a good strategy, regardless if you sell it or not.
Yeah, because you're
Yeah.
going to make more money,
Yeah.
you're going to lift the burden, you're going to put all these puzzle pieces together,
Yeah.
and then you have choices when you're ready to sell. Or if you never want to sell, that's why I talk about exit instead of selling,
Yeah.
because you can choose to exit your company however you want to do it, but someday you're going to have to do it.
Yeah. It sounds like if you're getting these pieces right, you may have the business in a position where it's running on automatic, and maybe your choice is to exit by just not going into the office anymore.
Yeah, to some extent, although that's not what my people want. They love their work
Yeah.
and it's they get a lot of their self-identity
Yeah. Through their work.
through their work and through the purpose and the impact. And so that those are all positive things, but your business does not have to be a burden. I wrote a whole book about that.
What about you mentioned disease? I've had a case now where we got a call from someone. They were sharing a story. We didn't provide services. Terminal disease, 6 month window on their life, and they had an asset that could serve their family. They didn't have time to do this, and the business wasn't ready in the traditional sense.
Mhm.
Have you ever had an experience like that, or is that still saleable if the circumstances are that you can't afford time?
The question in my mind is about the market.
Hmm.
So, yeah, the answer to the question is yes, you can
Okay.
still sell a business under those under duress,
Hmm.
but you have to prepare yourself because you're not going to get much for it because the buyer is going to know you're under duress.
Mm.
So the
Yeah.
question becomes, by the time you pay your attorney and your accountants and get this transaction done, are you actually going to make any money?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
may not. So now what you can do is you could set it up so that a family member or an attorney could sell it for you,
Mm-hmm.
even
Oh,
after you passed away.
after you're passing. Yeah.
Yeah. So you could prepare the company for sale, but you're not the one who's selling it. And that money would go to your estate or to your spouse. Or so there are plenty of circumstances. I've never experienced that because I would not take that situation,
Yeah.
but
But it does happen.
it does happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so all hope is not lost.
Right.
You just have to approach it a little more creatively.
Yeah. Is any type of business saleable? You mentioned these professional services, but maybe I make uh, jewelry, and I have a small jewelry business, and maybe
Mhm,
the annual revenue is small,
mhm.
of 50,000 a year or something like that. Is that saleable, or is there a certain size or industry that it's just you got to walk away?
In general, every
Yeah.
business is sellable,
Okay.
but everything is contingent on the buyer.
Yeah.
So it might be that that jewelry designer has a somebody who's bought from her from the very beginning and admires her work
Mm.
and her designs, and she wants to buy the company because she's realizing that she can take those, and again, if the intellectual property is included and she has the diagrams and the specifications for those designs, that's super valuable. Then
That's a great point.
she could hire someone, the new owner could hire someone to physically make the jewelry with the designer's intellectual property. So
Yeah.
so the answer in general is yes. I think any company is sellable, but just think if that jewelry designer had intentionally built her company with that in mind, how much more money she would get.
For sure. For sure. But okay. And that was an interesting point, is maybe a customer could be a buyer, but we're walking that fine line if we don't want to let the cat out of the bag,
Yes.
because we may, is there a strategy there?
Well, in my experience, it's very customized.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it all goes back to the roadmap. What
Yeah.
is important? So the jewelry designer may say, I'm going to exit anyway. And the main reason they want to keep it secret is from their staff. And if the jewelry designer doesn't have staff, which is
Mm-hmm.
very often the case,
Mm-hmm.
then it's less important. Plus, she's not advertising that she's selling.
Right.
She's just approaching this one customer
Mm-hmm.
and saying, this is confidential. I mean, you can even use an NDA
Mm-hmm.
and ask that they not disclose this information and it's confidential. And people are often very flattered by that,
Mm.
right?
That's
That
true.
right? Because
Yeah.
the designer knows how much you love her jewelry and she thought of you and said, I'm getting ready to sell and I'm willing to sell my designs and my intellectual property and my customer list,
Yeah.
and wondered if you might be interested in buying it. And that happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. AJ, do you have questions that have come up? 'Cause I know I kind of raced through that.
I mean, I'm still kind of looking for a story, just anything that you might have about maybe somebody who didn't think that they could sell
Mm.
and you were able to basically convince them,
Mm-hmm.
that they could.
Okay, so every woman thinks that. We are not raised to be breadwinners, typically,
Yeah.
especially the 50 and 60 and 70-year-olds. We're typically not raised to be breadwinners, and we're not raised to think we could build a company that we could sell. So we already have that roadblock. And that's part of what is the work that I do is I have to help them deal with that issue first. I don't have to convince them of anything. All I have to do is help them understand that every piece we put in place makes them more money.
And
That's
can
all
you
I
think of a
have to do.
specific person or story that you'd be
Yeah.
willing and able to share?
Yes.
Oh,
Although I'll change the name of the client in case
sure,
you
sure.
end up using this story. And actually, I wanted to mention that there's an exam. I don't talk about the exit in my book, but I do talk about this client in my book, if
Oh,
that interests you. So,
yeah,
so this client is the one I mentioned in the elder care industry,
yeah.
and we'll call her Deborah. And
Okay.
she had a 25-year history as a care manager.
Mm,
She, as a care manager, their client is the adult kid of the elder, right?
okay.
So her client is me,
Yep.
where I have aging parents.
Yep.
I'm so frustrated with the healthcare system. I don't really know how to help my parents, and I need guidance.
Yeah.
So she has a team of 12 care managers and then office staff as well. So a total of 15 employees. Some are contract and some are staff.
Okay.
And Deborah, when she and I meet, she's looking for an operations person because she knows there's great potential. She has lots of clients coming to her,
Mm-hmm.
but she's at that point, she was 64,
Mm-hmm.
and she was wise enough to recognize at some point, I'm either going to have a health issue or I'm going to die. And I don't want my company to die.
Mm,
So the way we really started was focusing on how can you make more money with less stress?
mm,
Okay, that's the foundation of what I teach.
yeah.
So that meant we had to fix her pricing. So we went in, we fixed her pricing. Now um, I teach value-based pricing, and in that methodology, the I want to be careful I'm not getting off track and respect your time. But the bottom line is with value-based pricing, there are different ways that you can do it. And the owner, Deborah, was very hesitant to do anything differently. She was still billing hourly. And so I helped her build a membership model, which
Okay.
is unheard of in the elder care industry.
Mm-hmm.
And she was very courageous and adopted it. And that became a huge selling point for the buyer. They were
Interesting.
so intrigued. And they're also in the elder care industry, but had never seen a membership model before.
Yeah.
So, because of that, that was very intriguing and attractive to the buyer. So so Deborah and I worked together for 6 years, started as I want to make more money, and became how can my business be less of a burden to me, and eventually evolved to I'm turning 70 soon, and I'm interested in how do I exit.
Mm,
So I don't have to convince people. All I have to do is talk about generating more revenue with less stress.
gotcha.
So, so she
And then
did.
it evolved.
So this person didn't really ever. What I was really looking for, I mean, that's a great story. I was just looking for a story about somebody who really said, I want to sell my business, but I don't think I can. And
Okay.
yeah.
So I've also dealt with women in that situation. The the reason it's hard to give you a story is because the first thing I have to do is change the way they think. And that's not fun and sexy.
Yeah.
No, I mean, actually, that is sort of, I mean, the whole point of what Mike's trying to do is actually, I mean, all of Mike's books are changing the way people think about their
Right?
business.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
is actually for us a sexy story when someone
Yeah.
changes the
True.
way they think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have to, there are three aspects that I have to understand when I go in to work with a client. I need to understand what they believe about their situation, like I have nothing to sell,
Mm-hmm.
or there's no buyer out there that would think my jewelry business is valuable, right? So I need to know what they believe about the situation. I need to know what they believe about themselves. So do they believe that they can take my advice and do something with it and actually sell their company? And then I need to understand what they believe about me. Do they believe I'm the right guide? Do they believe that what I'm telling them is the truth, quote unquote, truth?
Mm,
Right? So if I have those three factors when I go into a business and I'm really clear on those three things, then I can start my analysis of what is happening inside the company and how I need to address their thinking.
got it.
And words are less convincing than actions, always.
Mm,
So I can tell them things until I'm blue in the face. But if I can show them how we can structure something or how we can change the way they're thinking, or sometimes I'll even say, could you give me the benefit of the doubt for the moment? Believe this thing. And let's talk about all these other things if you will believe this for the moment. You don't have to believe it forever. And that
got it.
often will get them to open up. And sometimes they don't even know what they believe. They
If it
just
is,
know what they've
I'm really
heard.
sorry to interject. I'm looking at the clock. I only scheduled 45 minutes for us. Um, if it's okay, but this is super helpful, Patty, and I do want to go further into the strategy. If it's okay, could we schedule a second interview? Because I got another one starting now.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
Um, also is okay, now that we've done this, that we could still share this with our viewers. I'm sure they'd love this.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
I would appreciate having that same opportunity if I can also share this.
Oh yeah, by all means, please
Okay.
do. I got 5 pages of notes. So the next step is I got to digest this. AJ and I are gonna have a quick conversation. We're probably gonna want to dig into a story about what you were just building on
Okay.
in regards to someone who wanted to sell and you were able to do it, um, to see that to fruition as opposed to them falling back in love with the business. I just want to get that transaction because they
Yes.
wanted that from the get-go.
Yes.
But for now, it's good. This book is, we're just starting off. You're literally our fourth interview and just trying to
Okay.
get our hands around this. So thank you for your time and accommodating my super tight schedule.
Oh, no, that's no problem at all. I'm happy to schedule a second time.
Good.
And I'm also curious, I'll ask you in our second meeting how you may use this information in your book.
Yeah, to be determined. And that's what AJ and I are going to work on.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a long process to actually answer
Yeah.
that question.
Yeah, so we don't know 100%
Okay.
yet, but we're getting there.
That's
So
fair.
Patty, thank you. And AJ, I'll see you in the next interview. Actually, AJ, if you can hang back for a second, and then I'll see you on the
Yeah,
Peter
I'll hang
interview
back.
with Peter. All right,
Okay.
thanks, Patty. Have a nice
Thanks.
weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.